So you're running a small business. It might be a construction company, a restaurant, or even a non-profit. And you've reached a point of scale and success where you have a good team delivering great services using a range of tools that you've selected to provide the best to your customers. And in the background, these tools are all creating mountains of data. It's data that you understand is useful to you, but it's all over the place and kind of overwhelming, so you're not sure how to package it all together in a way that helps you to make better decisions. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to take your data mountain and turn it into business advantage with very little work using Power BI. I'm going to use the example of a restaurant where I have data from 3 different systems: a reservation tracking system, a point of sale system, and the payroll system. And I'm going to show you how to ingest these different types of data into one Power BI data set and create a really simple dashboard that can help you better understand your business than would be possible by looking at the data in each system in isolation. Best of all, everything I'm going to show you can be done without any additional cost if you already have a Microsoft 365 license. So you can get started, see how this works for you, and only invest additional dollars to scale your solution if you're seeing the benefits. Okay, so just jumping onto our demo system, I have a folder on the desktop here which has got a bunch of data for my example restaurant. And I've got some payroll data in this folder, so I've got CSV files for every bi-weekly payroll. And in here I've just got the date, the day, the name of the worker, the hours they work, their rate, their total, and their tips. Then I've also got 2 years of points of sale data and 2 years of reservation data, but all in one file. So this point of sale data for 2021, you can see we've got a whole bunch of transactions here, but basically broken down by the table, the party size, the server, the food total, the beverage total, the overall total, and the amount of tips on that transaction. And if we just take a look at the 2022 data, you can see this is exactly the same in terms of what we've got here, except the date is broken down differently. So month, day, and year, as opposed to all in one field as it was in 2021. And the reservations data is just customer with the date of their reservation, the time, and the size of their party. So very straightforward, the type of data that you might get from different systems if you're working in a restaurant. So what we're going to do is get started with Power BI. And if you don't have Power BI on your system yet, the easiest way to start with it is just to open the Microsoft Store. And you can search for Power BI. And you can install Power BI Desktop directly from here. So once you're in Power BI Desktop, we're just going to start with a blank report. And the first thing you want to do in Power BI when you start out is just get some data. So let's just take a look at this. So you've got this Get Data button on the ribbon, and you can see there is a whole bunch of different places and data types that you can bring into Power BI. So pretty much wherever your data resides, whatever type of export you're going to get, there's some way of getting your data into Power BI. And for ease of use, there are connectors even like into things like QuickBooks Online or into Salesforce, where you can directly access your data. So getting data into Power BI is really, really straightforward. And the benefit of getting your data into Power BI is that you can start combining data from different sources into one data set, which is going to help you to cut down on what is just a mountain of data and start to get use out of it in your business. So the first import I'm going to do is probably the easiest one for the purposes of this demonstration, and that's my reservations workbook. So I'm just going to come into File, I'm going to select Excel Workbook, I'm going to connect, and I'm going to go into my demo restaurant, and I'm going to select my reservations data. And when you open data from Excel, you can select which sheets you want. It gives you a preview of your data. And then you have the option of either loading data or transforming data. And if you click load, it'll just take this directly as it is into Power BI. If you click transform, then it will give you the option of transforming your data before you load it into Power BI. Like, for example, if there's some things you want to change, if there's some columns that you don't need, then you can go ahead and remove those by using transform. So given that we've got some other data sources that we need to get hold of, I'm going to click on transform, and this is going to open Power Query. Okay, so you can see that we've pulled in this data from the reservations table, and it's correctly identified that this is text, this is a date, this is text, this is a time, and this is a number here. So that's important. Your data type is very important, and if for some reason it gets it wrong, you can actually change the data type, so you've got the right type of data in your column. But for this purpose, this is working perfectly well. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of additional sources. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my 2021 point of sale, and I'm going to grab my 2022 point of sale, and now I've got my point of sale data in here. You can see I've got my two different tables with my two different structures. So what I want to do here is actually combine these three columns so that I can create a date out of them. So what I'm going to do is select them, then I'm going to right click and say add column from examples. I'm going to change this column name to date, and then I'm just going to start typing my example here. So I'm going to have 3, 22, 2022, and click enter, and now I'm going to add 8, 18, 2022. And you see, with those couple of examples, Power BI has worked out what I want to do. So you can see the formula that it's providing is to change the year, the month, the day into a date, and that's exactly what I want to do. And I can click OK, and you can see my new column is here. And you can see down the side here, this applied steps. Now, it's very important to understand that what Power Query is actually doing is taking a set of steps and applying them to your data. So even if your data changes, so long as the structure of your data doesn't change, Power BI can repeat the process of transforming your data with Power Query so that you can update your data without having to go through these steps every time. And that's a very different process than if previously you've been trying to pull data out of this place or that place and copy it into Excel and then use it for something, and then the next time you come back to it, you can't quite remember what you've done. In Power BI, it's very, very repeatable. So you see we've got this date column here now, and this has been correctly identified as a date. I'm going to go ahead, and now that I've used these three columns, I'm going to remove them. And now I should find that the columns that I've got in this table are exactly the same as the columns that I've got in my 2021 table. So they're fully consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and append these queries together. So I'm going to come over to append queries. I'm going to say append queries as new. I'm going to select my first and my second tables that I want to join together, and I can do this with any number of tables that I want. And I'm going to click OK. You can see I've got a new table called append 1. So I'm just going to rename that to transactions, because that's all my transactions in one. And I'm going to go ahead and select these 2 points of sale tables. I'm going to right click. I'm just going to do one at a time. I'm going to right click and click off enable load and enable load. And what that does is it allows that table to sit here as a reference in Power Query. So I'm able to reference the data in it, but it's not going to pull through to Power BI. So it's not going to confuse the data model that I've got in Power BI. So next, I'm going to add in my payroll data. So the payroll data is a little different because there's like 50 different files sitting there. And if you've got bi-weekly payroll and you're getting a report for every bi-weekly payroll, then that can add up pretty quickly over time. So I'm not going to want to do what I just did with the point of sale data, A, because all the files are consistent in terms of their structure. There isn't any transformation that I need to do to merge them together. And B, there's just too many of them to handle like that. So let's click on New Source. And this time I'm going to select Folder. I'm going to connect. I'm going to select the folder with all the payroll data in it. I'm going to click OK. And then you can see it's grabbed all these different files. So I'm just going to go ahead and say combine and transform data. And what Power Query is now going to do is it's going to join up all of those different files together into one query. So I can just click OK. And you can see it gives me one query at the bottom here called payroll. It does add in a few things that I don't want here. Like, for example, there are some null rows that have been pulled through. I don't want those. And I don't need this source name. So I can just go ahead and remove that source name. And I can go ahead and filter out those null rows, just to reduce my data set down slightly. Now remember, all of these steps are being applied over here in a repeatable fashion. So if I were to add next week's payroll into my payroll folder, I wouldn't need to go through this whole process again. I would just need to refresh my data source. And because I'm applying the same transformations to every file in that folder, so long as I add my report into that same folder, I'm able to bring it into Power BI without any problems whatsoever. So there we go. I've got my 3 tables here ready to go. My point of sale ones are in italics, so they're not going to be pulled through. So I'm going to click on Close and Apply. So you can see I've now pulled these 3 tables into Power BI. I've got all my fields here. And so there's a few things that I need to do to tidy up my data model to be able to use it well. The first thing I need to do is create something we call a date table, because Power BI, to work well, really needs to have every date between the first date in your data through to the last date in your data in one table so it can reference that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this data button here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new table. And I'm going to call this date table. And what you're doing here is you're writing in a language called DAX, Data Analysis Expressions. Now don't confuse this with the work that you're doing in Power Query, where you use a language called M. DAX is very much like using Excel, so if you're familiar with using Excel, this will look very similar to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calendar, and I'm going to have a start date of the 1st of January 2021. So I'm going to say 01/01/2021, and then I'm going to have an end date of 12/31/2022. And you can see immediately it's given me every date down here. So what this enables me to do is to be able to, number one, declare this as a date table. So I'm going to mark this as my date table. And I'm going to select my date column as my date column. And I'm going to say OK. And this is now marked as my date table, so Power BI knows this is the table with my dates in it. And then I'm going to add some additional columns to this table, because I want to be able to interpret these dates in slightly different ways. So the first thing that I could do is I'm going to add a column for the month. So I'm going to call this month, and I'm just going to say equals month of the date. You can see I'll get my month there, and then I'm going to add another column. I'm going to call this short month, and I'm going to format my date with 3 M's, which gives me the short 3-character month reference. So you can see we've got that in there. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the year. you may be wondering, why are you doing this? Well, every date in my table is an individual date. And if I want to be able to group them, so say I want to be able to group them by year, I need to be able to break them down into one distinct value, which is they're either 2021 or 2022. So the fact is that even though I've got this date here, I still need to break it out into those categories that I want to use in my analysis. So you can work on your date table to get in there what you need in terms of the analysis that you want to do elsewhere in your Power BI report. And the last one I'm going to add is a weekday number. And this is going to equal weekday of the date. And that's just telling me what day in the week that actually is. Oh, and I guess I should add the day in there as well. So let's do that just for the purposes of having it there. So we're going to do format, date, and this is going to be day. There we go. So we've got everything there that we need. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to head on over to our model, and we're going to create relationships between these different tables. And this can be quite a complicated issue, but in data sets like this, don't worry about it too much. Most of the time, Power BI will work out what you're looking for. So at a basic level, what a relationship is allowing you to do is to relate data in one table to the data in another table through some kind of key that allows Power BI to realize that they're all the same. And in this case, the main key that I've got here are my dates. So I'm going to grab the reservation date on my reservations, and I'm going to take it over to date in my date table. And you can see that what Power BI does is it creates a relationship, and what it's saying here is there's one unique value on this end of the relationship that represents multiple or many values on the other end of the relationship. So we can have many reservations on one given day, and that the filtering direction of this relationship goes from our date table to our reservations table. So if I select a value on the reservations, on the date table, it is going to filter down the reservations table. Now, there are situations where Power BI can get confused, and you may want to customize this a little bit, but that kind of scope is beyond where we're at with this video. And frankly, by the time you get to the point where Power BI isn't working this out for you, either your needs have become too complicated or your data set has become too complicated. And if you're struggling with it, you really need to do some more training. For example, the PL300 Power BI Data Analyst certification could be a good starting point for learning what you need to learn with Power BI at that stage. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab these other dates and bring them over here. And then we have some other factors in here that we could think about. So, for example, I have the name of an employee here, and I have the name of a server here. So those two things could relate to one another. So let's go ahead and do that. And you see, one of the things that we've got here is a many-to-many. So we've done one-to-many. What does many-to-many mean? Well, there could be many entries in the payroll table that relate to many entries in our transactions table. And while that might be useful in many cases, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for a situation where I can select a single employee and it filters down the data that I'm looking at elsewhere in Power BI. So this isn't going to achieve that for me. A situation where this might work for you is, say you were looking at recipes, and an ingredient might be in many recipes, and many recipes may also have that ingredient. That could be a situation where you have a very legitimate use case for a many-to-many relationship. But in this case, while I could create a many-to-many relationship, it isn't really going to help me with the data analysis here. So what I want to do is create an employees table. I don't have to get any new data in order to do that. I've got all the data here because I pay everyone every 2 weeks. So everyone's data should be in here for that purpose. So let's go ahead and create a new table. And I'm going to create an employees table. And I'm going to make this the distinct values in my payroll table. And the column that I want is name. So let's go ahead and create that. And you can see I now have an employee table with those names. So I can go ahead and relate this name to here and relate this name to here. And you can see essentially I still have that many-to-many relationship because I have a many-to-one and a one-to-many. So if I was to have a line between the two, I would have many-to-many. But I've put this table in between where I would be able to select an employee and filter down on both of these tables, which is something that I would probably want to be able to do. So there we go. I've got a data model here, and these can get quite complicated, and there's a lot to learn about building good data structures, but I've just tried to build something that's very quick and very simple to be able to exemplify how Power BI works. So once you've got your data structure like this together, you've modeled it, you're going to jump over to your report. And let's start thinking about what we can do here. So the first thing that I want to highlight is that you have all of these visualizations over here, and you have all of your data in this fields pane to the right. So basically what you do to build a Power BI report is that you take visualizations and you throw data on them. And at a basic level, that's all you're doing with Power BI. There's more complicated stuff going on in the background, obviously, that you can do. But if you simply know that you can select a visualization and throw data on it, then you can achieve something in Power BI Desktop. So the one that I'm going to highlight first is a slicer. And what a slicer does is enables you to filter down your data on your report so that you can get more the analysis that you're looking for to really understand your data. So the first slicer that I want is to be able to slice my data by year. And I want to be able to do it in a slightly different way, so I can press a button. So I'm going to go across to Format Your Visual and Slicer Settings, and I'm going to change this to a tile. So I'm getting a blank. I'm getting a blank here. And what that represents is that there's data in my model that isn't aligning with a date in my date table. So remember that when I created my date table, I created every date from the start of 2021 to the end of 2022. And I happen to know that one of my payroll periods actually crept into 2023. So if I want to eliminate that, what I can do is I can jump over to this Transform Data button. That opens up Power Query for me again. And all I'm going to do is eliminate those extra fields, those extra data points that I've got here. So let's do some date filters, and I want to filter all of the dates that are before the 1st of January 2023. So I'm going to go ahead, close and apply that, jump back to my, let's just wait for this to load, I'm going to jump back to my report, and you can see immediately I've got rid of those blanks. So if you end up with blanks or you end up with nulls that you're not really wanting, then you just need to kind of track back where that data is coming from, what isn't linked up to what, and eliminate it in Power Query. And if you eliminate it in Power Query, that data never pulls across to Power BI, so you're not having to worry about that data over here. So I'm going to add in actually another slicer below this one, and this slicer I'm going to put my employee on. So I'm going to add the name of my employee, and I'm going to change what this looks like. So I'm going to change that to employee. And there we go, I've got slicers here for my year and for my employee. So the first thing that might be quite cool to know is I have food and beverage split out here. So it would be interesting to know on a month-by-month basis, how does my split of food and beverage sales change? So to do that, I'm going to use a column chart. And I think the type of column chart that I'm going to use is this one, a stacked column chart. So I'm going to create that, throw that onto here, and everything is drag and drop. So you just drag it out, make it bigger as you want. And I want to do it by month, so I'm going to use my short month. And you can see the short month has been thrown onto the x-axis. So what do I want on my y-axis? Well, I need my beverage sales and I need my food sales. And you can see I'm getting a huge number here. So why am I getting that huge number? Well, I'm adding together all of the sales in my system. So really, probably what I want is just summing everything together. I want to know what the average sale is like. So I can very easily do that. I can come down here, click on this little arrow, and change this from sum to average. But it's still not quite showing me the right data because it's not giving me any idea that these are dollars that we're showing here. So how do we deal with that? Well, I'm going to come down to my beverage, and you can see here I've got a format option. I can change this to currency. I can do the same thing for food, change that to currency, and suddenly I've got my currency down here. But hang on a minute, look at our dates. They're in this weird order that I don't understand. Why are they in this order? Well, because we haven't ordered them. So for every column in your data set, if you need to, you can order it by a different column. So remember how we created both the month and the short month? So what we're going to do is select the short month, but we're going to say that that is ordered by the month number, not the short month text, but the month number. And then we're going to go ahead, and I'm actually going to get rid of the short month for a second. I'm going to add it back in, and you can see that immediately our months are in the right order. So maybe there's some correlation between the party size that comes in and the amount of distribution that we're seeing between food and beverage sales. And yet you're not seeing much distribution here. If this was real data, you would probably see more variance. But this is just fake data that's been created by creating random values in those spreadsheets. So it's going to be fairly even. This is more to show you how you create visualizations than to really dig deep into how you analyze data and what it looks like. So I have this value here of party size. So I could take that party size if I wanted to and throw it on here, but the more useful thing to do would be to layer another chart on top of this. So right now I've got this selected as a stacked column chart. You can see that's selected there. But there's actually another option down here, which is line and stacked column chart. So I'm going to click on that, and it's immediately going to change what type of visualization it is. And all this has done is added this line y-axis in here. So I'm going to go ahead and add party size into my line y-axis. And you can see I get a line chart where I'm getting very large numbers. So that can't be right, that for a $150 table I'm getting 900 people on the table. Oh, the issue is the sum again. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to change that to average. And you can see I get an average of between 4 and 4.8 people on the table. But bear in mind that we also have a party size up here in reservations. So the party size in reservations is what people asked for when they made a reservation. And the party size in transactions is how many people were actually sitting at the table when we took a payment. So it might be interesting to know what the difference is between these two values. So that's very easy to do. We can just grab this party size and we can change that to average. And now we have both of them together, but the problem is which is which. So let's go back, get rid of this one. We've got the reservations party size. So I'm going to change this to reserved party size. And you can see immediately this changes up here. And I'm going to grab the other party size, put that back, change this back to average, And I'm going to change that to actual party size. And you can see there's some variance in this. Again, this is random data, so you're not going to necessarily see that much variance when you create your own reports, but this just demonstrates what you can kind of look at on screen. Now, the really cool thing with this is these charts, and if I drag this out so it's a bit easier to see, are responsive. So if I wanted to see like what is the impact of a different server, I can select Amy, and this changes based on the data that's related to Amy, or I can get rid of that and I can narrow down to 2021 or 2022. It's entirely possible to use these slices to change what you're seeing on screen so that you can really dig into and investigate what's going on. So let's put this back up to the top of our screen like this, and let's think about some other things that we might want to know. So I'm going to add another visualization, which is a card. And a card just lets us have one value. So I want to know throughout this period how many diners were there. So I'm going to grab my transactions party size, because that's the actual number of people that were on the transactions, drag it in here, and I kind of want to change this to total diners. And again, if I select Amy, that changes. If I select John, that changes. If I get rid of that and everything is selected, that changes. But I can also come over to here to say, well, what's the impact of it be in May? Well, in May, I have 887 diners, of which 431 were in 2021 and 456 were in 2022. So you can very quickly slice and dice your data in these visuals. And I've got my total diners there. So how about the total number of tables? So let's get another card and throw that in there. So I'm going to change this to count. And that's the count of the number of parties. And so I can change this to total tables. And then I might want to know something like what was the average spend per diner. So how would I work that out? So something that's really cool in Power BI is something called measures. And what a measure is a calculation that is contextualized based on what you're seeing on screen. So I can create a measure. If you think about it, the average spend per diner is just the total that I've got here divided by the total number of people, right? So if I take my total divided by the number of diners, then I've got my measure. So let's create that. I'm going to right click on transactions there. I'm going to create a new measure. And I'm going to change this to spend per guest. And I'm going to use the function divide. I'm going to sum my total, because that's the amount of revenue that I got, and I'm going to divide that by the sum of party size, because that's the total of the number of guests that I've had in the restaurant. So if I create another card here, and I get spend per guest, I get 33.40. I can change this to currency, and I can change it to 2 decimal places, and I get 33.40. Now if I change this to 2021, you can see the number changes there. So a measure is always within the context of what it is you're seeing on screen, unless you specifically code it so that it is. So you do have the option of doing that, but by default, when you create a measure, it's within that context of what you're seeing on screen. So what else might we want to know here? So you can imagine a situation where you have all this payroll data in here, and you'd be interested in knowing what are you gaining in terms of revenue per dollar that you're spending on labor or per hour that you're spending on labor. So let's think about that a moment, that we want to work out the hours of labor by the income. So we can create a new measure under our payroll, and I'm going to call this dollars revenue per hour labor, and this is going to be a divide again, the sum of my revenue. So I'm going to use, now bear in mind there's a total here and there's a total here, so I need to specify which total it is. So I'm going to make sure that I'm using my transactions table and my total, and I'm going to divide that by the sum of my hours. Now let's say that I want to have a column chart here. And on the column chart, I'm going to put the day of the week on the x-axis. And then I'm going to put the revenue on the y-axis. And you can see again, these are out of order. So I'm going to want to go through and put them in the right order. So let's jump up to this day and sort by column, and I'm going to sort that by weekday number. And I can go ahead and get rid of this day from here, throw it back on again, and you can see we're now in the right order. So I've got dollars revenue per hour of labor by day there, so that's interesting to see. But is there any variation depending on who it is? Well, you can see this kind of jumps around all over the place, but you can see that this is very much following through, changing depending on what I'm selecting. You can see if I'm selecting something down here, it changes the portion up here, and so on and so forth. So the next thing that I might be interested in is I've got my data with all of my reservations, but how often do different customers come to the restaurant? So I have all of my customers here in this reservations table, but what I want to do is create a customers table. So I'm going to create a new table. I'm going to call this customers, and I'm going to say that the values in here are the distinct values in my reservations customer name column. So there you go. I've got all of my customers there, and I can create a new column in here, which is the total number of visits that they've had. So let's create total visits. So I'm going to use the function countx, and I'm going to pass this a table which is from a filter, and my filter is going to be on the table reservations, and my filter expression is going to be that the reservations customer name equals the customer's customer name. And then from there, I'm simply going to count the transactions. I'm going to count the customer name. And you can see I've got a total number of visits that a customer has had. I'm going to add a connection between customers and reservations, so I do have that relationship there. I can jump back into my report here and say I want to create a table. So I'm going to use this table visual, and I'm going to add into here my customer name, and I'm going to add in my total visits. But you can see that unfortunately, as I filter my data, this isn't changing. So it's not telling me how many visits someone has had in a particular period of time. So this is an important thing to note about columns versus measures. So a column actually adds data to your table. So I'm going through and I'm looking at a complete data set, the unfiltered data set, and saying how many times has this customer come to the restaurant, which is a perfectly legitimate and useful measure to have. But it isn't one that we can contextualize based on the other filters, as I'm not filtering this right now. However, if I were to use a measure would only calculate based on the data that's being filtered in the report right now. So if I were to filter 2022, that measure is only going to calculate based on that. So let's take a look at what this would look like. I'm going to go into this and I'm actually going to copy this here, this formula. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to right click here and create a new measure. And I'm going to call this total visits measure. And this is probably going to ask me to change this a little bit. Yeah, it's not going to want me to refer to this table here. It's just going to want me to call out customer name, I think. But apart from that, this is going to work exactly the same. It's essentially exactly the same formula. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that in. We now have this customer name, this total visits measure. I'm going to add this into my table. And you can see that my total visits measure is changing, but my sum of total visits is remaining exactly the same. So the more useful metric here is going to be my total visits measure, not my sum of total visits. So let's get rid of that from my table. And then I'm just going to say visits. And I'm going to sort this highest to lowest so that you have a good idea of who your best customer is in any given period of time. So once you're finished creating what you want to create in Power BI, you can simply save this file on your computer as you normally would for any other file in Office. And you can open this and you can work with this on your own computer. You can share that file with other people, so long as they have the same access to the data sources as you, they would be able to use it. And everyone can use Power BI Desktop for free. You also have the option of publishing to the Power BI service, and to do that you need to sign in. So you can sign in using your email address. So I'm just going to get this signed in. So once I've got this signed in, I can simply click on Publish. It'll ask me to save if there have been any changes, and then you can select My Workspace and publish this to the Power BI service. And once you've successfully published to the Power BI service, you can open the link to the Power BI service and you can see your report up in the cloud. Now, what you can't do without additional licensing is share this cloud-based version of your report with anyone else in your organization. You are limited to working in My Workspace. You're not actually able to share out into other workspaces without additional licensing. But there's a very rich set of features here that you can use without additional licensing. And in the web, you can do exactly what you were doing on the desktop, edit things and move things around and so on and so forth. So it's a very clean, useful way of joining your data together and taking that data mountain that you might have and turn it into something that will help you make decisions in the future. So hopefully that's given you a good taster in how Power BI can be your ally in taking any mountain of data that you might have and turning it into something that you can analyze together to make good decisions to understand your business better. If you enjoy content like this, then I hope you'll give the video a like and think about subscribing to the channel. Until next time, bye-bye.